Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Demystifying Money. I am luckily joined by my friend, Kimberly Cohen. She is a licensed insurance broker at Barrows Insurance, and they serve Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And we're going to talk today about insurance. Now, this is a topic that a lot of us have to deal with. It's a big financial part of our, monthly expenses. All of us are thinking about it as you buy property, as you move, all of these things that we do. But sometimes it's a piece that might get ignored, or maybe we just kind of continue doing what we've always been doing. And so I wanted to talk with Kim today because I think this can be a big problem when it comes to building wealth, is not looking at the protection side of it. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about my favorite topic.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
Tell me a little bit more about, how you got into insurance and kind of, a little bit more about you, because I think you have such an interesting background. And I think that a lot of times we end up working in different fields than we ever expected, but can find a way to use all those skills to help people. So how did you get into insurance?
Yeah, I spent 21 years of my career in public health, working at YMCAs, both locally and nationally, on creating healthier communities in a leadership role. And I was having a glass of wine one night on my deck with my husband, and he owns a mortgage company, Heritage Home Funding. And he said, I need a good insurance person. And I said, well, I have $1 million at the Y and I can totally connect you. And we went out to lunch with a few of my board members. And lo and behold, Jay Barrows of Barrows Insurance was one of them. And we realized I had a potential business opportunity that I really couldn't pass up. So I partnered with Jay to own my own book of business in partnership with Barrows Insurance. And I started working with Seth and his clients and supporting them in their home buying insurance needs. And since then have expanded my book of business to cover both Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire.
That's awesome. I think it's cool how, sometimes there is just, in business, there's so many different parts. There's so many different things. And like you said, your husband with the mortgage space, I'm always looking for, I need a person to talk about insurance, or an attorney, or an accountant. All of these pieces work together, but they are very specific. So when it comes to something like insurance, how would you say that it's been changing lately, at least in our area in New England? Because I think a lot of people are spending a lot more on insurance. I noticed that the area of financial services and insurance was one of the biggest spends that people are increasing their budget on. I think a lot of it has to do with insurance, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what's changing and why some people might be thinking about this again for the first time in a while.
Yeah. So since COVID, insurance has changed dramatically, both swinging on the price reduction side, which we saw for the first time really ever with COVID. People weren't driving. People were not really using their cars, and their carriers really rewarded that because we saw a huge reduction in incidents because people were staying in their home. From that time, we then saw fewer people on the road. And when fewer people on the road, we were finding people were going much faster. And we saw some of those accidents in 2021, beginning of 2022, being really tragic. And the liability payouts on the auto side of the things were astronomical. Because when you get into an accident, bumper to bumper accident going 30 miles per hour on your way to work in Boston, the payouts are small because the injuries are small. And when you get into an accident going, 80 or 75, really tragic incidents. And we're all sort of paying for that because we saw record liability claims. We're also seeing record liability claims in terms of lawsuits. We sort of live in an era where people want to place blame or get sort of compensated for the challenges that they have been faced with an auto accident. And we're seeing higher than ever amounts of lawsuits and payouts. And unfortunately, insurance really wasn't set up as a business model to be sustainable in that way. And because of this, the carriers are then having to increase everyone's premiums similar to what we've seen in the health insurance side, as obesity numbers increase, we've also seen in those health issues associated with obesity, like heart and diabetes, when they become cost prohibitive to the carriers need to then increase the premiums. And then on the homeowner side, again, COVID sort of being a huge turning factor, we've seen the ability to get the materials that we need to rebuild homes. That takes, it's so much more expensive, and we're still seeing those costs. And then we're seeing on the, if there was a total loss or something to that effect, or a fire, to rebuild a home, what we're seeing is getting tradespeople is an absolute barrier right now. And so the cost to rebuild a home is much higher, both due to construction costs as well as the supplies needed. So if right now in our industry, for every 5 people that are retiring, because most of our tradespeople are in the baby boom age range, we're seeing only 2 to 3 people going into the trades. So we're seeing a huge economic burden on our country, and we're not seeing this slow down anytime soon.
No, if anything, this will continue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we're really watching the trends and predicting and really helping our clients make sure they're in a very competitive product. So but we're all seeing and sort of navigating this. These increases are around, when I first started in the industry in 2019, the average homeowner increase was less than 10%, anywhere between 5 and 10. And now they're well over 15% annually. So, and that's just in a few years.
Yeah. So I think it's important for people to meet with an insurance agent or talk to someone. But I think there's usually a lot of fear that if they do, that there's going to be an increase, or there's something where they might think like, okay, if we don't communicate, then maybe they'll just, forget now. Tell me, why is that set it and forget it mentality? What is that costing people who maybe haven't looked at their policy or haven't shopped around in years?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think the first thing that happens that I notice is, and this happened to our family as well before I was in the insurance industry, we're all busy. We're all busy leading our lives. We all have, careers, or supporting our children or supporting elderly parents, and we're all just busy. So you sort of, many people, their strategy around insurance has been you buy a home or you get an apartment in a renter's policy, and then you get it, and then you look at it. You don't really know what the coverages are. You don't really know if they're appropriate. You sort of just compare price, and you sort of look at numbers from multiple quotes, and you're like, okay, this one seems reasonable, but we're really never taught insurance. And it's really important. I think the first thing is to find someone that you trust, because if you can trust an agent, whether that's direct with a carrier, I'm a licensed broker, which means I represent multiple carriers. And so a lot of the times with that, I represent some of the bigger carriers, like a Progressive or a Travelers, but you get a human that and that you can call or text or email, and then I can give you guidance and advice to help shape where you are. So I think for many people, it starts with just being busy. And I think the second thing, it starts with lack of knowledge. We all don't like touching things that we don't know enough about. And I think it gets overwhelming sometimes for us to even think about it. I think I look at insurance, it's sort of like renting an apartment, where it's not, you don't feel like you're investing, and you don't feel like there's a return on your investment. So many people get frustrated with insurance. And I think when we don't enjoy something or don't like something or have sort of negative connotation, we also tend to avoid it. So I think all of those factors really do influence why people don't talk or think about insurance until they have to. And unfortunately, by then it's usually too late. And so it's really critical, like you said, to review your policies and to have someone that you can trust guiding you about what is an appropriate coverage for, our homes are our biggest asset, and our autos are our biggest liability. And when we think about it that way, with asset protection, you're helping people to build wealth and accumulate wealth. And we want to make sure that you're protected. And that's really, really critical in the event that something tragic happens, either with your home or auto.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think you're right. People don't see the, the immediate, there's no instant gratification. It's really like, I would talk to people about that with life insurance and things like that. Like, the hope is you don't need this term policy. Yeah. The point is that you might, and some people do. And so it's like these unpleasant things that we have to prepare for. But I have seen it where some people financially don't understand the impact that a large lawsuit or a major accident could have. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that changes as we get older and build wealth and, acquire assets, where we start out really probably not having all that much. Like, what are they
Absolutely.
going to take from me? Where that changes as people get older and they build businesses, they have family, all of those things. So I think it's super important for people who maybe are listening and thinking, okay, like, I don't even know how to find out what I have. How do people
Yeah.
find out what their coverage or their information is if this really has been something that they've just put on auto pay, or they really don't know what they have?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the number one barrier for people when we do policy reviews. So I offer something called a complimentary policy review. And what that means is you send me a copy of your policy. I look at the coverage, I look at the price, I look at the endorsements or the different features that you've added to your policy to make sure they're appropriate. And so what I mean by appropriate is not too much coverage, not too little coverage, just sort of the right amount of coverage. And is it appropriately or competitively priced? And if it is, then we keep you right where you are with your current premium, your current agent and that kind of thing. If we have a different option, then we can switch you over and you have choices, or at least now you're more educated about what you should have and why. And we help you sort of navigate what that looks like and give you those a general understanding of what's in the policy. But the number one barrier to that for people is I don't know where to find my policy. They don't have it electronically. They don't have a hard copy. They can't figure out where it was, or they can only find an older one, especially now because many of the carriers have switched to all electronic communication, or that people might have an app on their phone. That's how they see it. And they're like, how do I download it? How do I send it to you? So yeah, it's simple. You just have to know who your carrier is or your agent
Mm-hmm.
and reach out to them and say, can you send me a copy of my policy? And it's as simple as that. And it's really important
Mm-hmm.
to have those policies. So first step for your clients and your listeners is to have a copy of your policy. Know who your carrier is. So that's the organization that would provide coverage in the event that something happens. Know if you have an agent that is representing you with that carrier, and know who those humans are and know who those contacts are. Have your policy numbers written down, in the age of phones and having notes and different strategies that make it easily accessible. Many of us remember like insurance policy cards that we had in our car, right, in our glove compartment. Those are no longer relevant to our world because you can have an app where you can just have the policy number. Everything can be electronic. So sort of having those systems in place so that you have access is this the number one easy first step for people.
I think it seems like it would be so easy, but you're right. I think like our health insurance provider might send us an actual card like that we have in our wallet
Correct.
still. But I think when it
Correct.
comes to our home insurance, and a lot of times like you may only need to find that on certain occasions, it might not be something you need every day, but having it easily accessible, I think is really important, and being able to access it because you're paying for this. And I think that a lot of times people really just again, put things on autopilot, where you mentioned doing that review, which I think is interesting because a lot of times, I think people are maybe unsure what they need or what, and so I think having like a free policy review can be really helpful. And also that does not bind you to anything, really.
No,
I mean,
right, absolutely.
you are giving them information, which is super valuable. And talk quickly about the difference between, you mentioned being a broker, a licensed broker with multiple carriers. Now, I think this is very important. As somebody who's a fiduciary, I am not tied to a specific fund family or a specific firm where I have to invest my clients' dollars, because I have to put them in the most appropriate investment, the best that I could find. And so I think it is important in my world, but what does it mean specifically insurance, especially if somebody's like, well, I've just been with this company forever, or my parents were with this company. Like, where does the loyalty lie? And also, like, what might they be missing out on if they really have only, continued to renew the same carrier?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I think so many people, I have grown adults like in their 40s and 50s, when I say to them, like, tell me about your current insurance experience. Do you have an agent? Are you direct? So those are sort of the two different options that most people have. So you can just, pick up the phone and call Progressive, or you can come to an agency who also represents Progressive. The pricing is similar. I think the pros and cons are working with an agent gives you a human and not just a 1-800 number to call. So many people who want that personal connection or want that guidance or advice prefer to go to a insurance agency because then you also have a variety of product lines to choose from. I find that many clients who are actively out shopping or thinking about price or have in the last few years are doing a lot of work on their own. And that is great because they're advocating for themselves. But in my opinion, my role as a licensed agent is to advocate for my clients. And I want to be there to advise them in terms of they're adding a new driver or a young driver to their policy. Is this policy and carrier that they're with still appropriate for them? Because I have some carriers that reward you financially and they're, user friendly for young drivers.
Yeah.
And I have some carriers who like clients who don't have a mortgage and will reward you financially for that. So it's about understanding and navigating that product. And then just because we put you with a carrier that's right for you today doesn't mean it's going to be the right fit for you 3 to 5 years from now. And I have the ability to call my clients after every year I do an annual policy review. And if I find that their pricing is getting away from them or I'm not happy with that carrier for whatever reason, and I compare I'm able to look at data across all of my carriers as well as statewide and nationwide data to make sure that, they're all increasing. Is the increase appropriate? And I think that's what we really look at. And right now in Massachusetts, there's a handful of carriers that do not have appropriate pricing increases. And my volume of business with annual policy reviews and then writing new business is 3 times the volume that I'm typically used to. And that's because a lot of the pricing is going totally out of whack. And it's really important to meet with someone to be able to review your policies, make sure your coverage and pricing is appropriate. And like you said, Misty, you don't have to change anything.
Yeah.
You can always call your agent to say, like, what would happen if I change my deductibles? What would the premium be? Or how, if I increase or decrease this coverage, what would the quote be? And you can just get a quote and you can look at what are the pros and cons of that, or have a conversation with them to say, are there any new discounts available or anything I need to be aware of that is changing with your guidelines? We're seeing carriers weekly send new updated guidelines.
Yes.
So before, a roof could be 30 years old and now it might need to be 15. And that's a huge difference that happens in a year's time, where some of my carriers have tightened up their guidelines, which means if people aren't staying on top of their home renovations, they could be non-renewed. And that can get really scary or overwhelming for people. So helping to understand and navigate that, because I can see how old your roof is, and helping you understand what resources are available so that you can plan and financially plan for strategies like that.
I've seen, and I think insurance in Massachusetts in particular has been making like headlines. I saw something yesterday about like drones flying around and like actually like people getting dropped from their insurance because of drone. Is this like, is AI and technology, like, is this having a major impact on the insurance space? Because I mean, it's definitely going beyond like self-reporting and things like that. Like how creative are these carriers getting when it comes to really figuring out like what people have and what is a good bet for them versus wanting to drop them or rate them?
Yeah, it's insurance is like the wild, wild west right now. I mean, it is changing by the minute, and it's really important that, again, I can't emphasize enough, if you get nothing else from listening to this podcast today, it's be with someone that you trust, because you have to, because they are steering this whole ship for you, and we are trying to gather as much information and process it as quickly as possible so that we're doing the right thing for our clients and making sure that everything is staying okay, or is controlling what we can. But yeah, a lot of my carriers, some of the big nationwide ones, are using satellite images and really roofs. Roofs are a big one. I mean, when you think about your home, right, like water and roofs can be a major, major issue, and if there's something that goes wrong with your roof. So in terms of carriers trying to reduce their risk, right, we have to think of insurance like a business model. And if you owned an insurance company, or, you were the carrier, you want lower risk. So to lower your risk, so to reduce your ability to pay out claims, you have to look at things like age of roof. And
That's
that's really, really
interesting. Yeah.
important. Yeah.
And I think the weather in general, and I know that I've talked about weather events and the $1 billion weather events that every single year that we're having, and it's 114 degrees in Florida today. There are
Yeah.
some carriers with flooding and storms that I feel like this is going to be a constant change in like actually like the where our homes are located and the
Oh, 100%.
insurability of certain places. So is that something too that like I know there's a lot of things that are very hard for people to control. But are there any ways like if you are if you're near the like what can we do to maybe
Yeah.
help boost our chances of, getting good pricing or trying to like take care of what we have in a way that could maybe make insurance a little bit more affordable or easier to maintain.
Yeah, absolutely. We are, whether you believe in global warming or not, the weather is changing, and the severity of weather-related incidents is real in the insurance world, and the claims associated with those extreme weather incidents. So there's three states, California, Florida, and Louisiana, that are having a major impact on our country's insurance sort of economic burden
Mhm.
because we're seeing such high rates of severe weather related incidents. In Florida and California specifically, if a hurricane comes through and you think about it from a homeowner side, that's what we think about when it wipes out, but it will also wipe out your vehicles. And when we think about that perspective, when sometimes if you've freaking in or visited Florida, you think about like, wow, everybody has such nice cars down here and these high value cars
Yeah,
because A, they're
yeah,
retired, right?
yeah.
And they're down there, or they've treated themselves to the Maserati or the, not just like the regular nice BMW or
Mhm.
Mercedes, but like that next level
Yeah.
high value vehicle. And because of that, those cars are getting wiped out, right? And those have a replacement cost value and
Mhm.
an impact on our economy from the insurance perspective. We are very lucky here in New England that we are just filled with water and it's
Yeah.
lovely from a perspective. If you like the ocean, New
Mhm.
England is the place to live. It is a major, major challenge with insurance. The closer you are to the coast, the higher risk you are. And when I
Mhm.
say close to the coast, I have a client in Lynn and he's not a waterfront
Yeah.
property. It's a multi-family in kind of the middle of that
Mhm.
city. He doesn't define himself as coastal,
Yeah.
but as the bird flies, if you go from the coast all the way over, he's defined as coastal. So it's
Wow.
very limited in terms of they look at 5 miles from the coast, from the point of water all the way through to your home. And so you want to avoid 5 miles to the coast if you can, or understand that your product lines will be way more
Yeah.
expensive or way more limited. And that's fine, but you have to think through that. I've had all of my carriers, except for two, drop out of covering the Cape and the islands.
Yeah.
And that was just within this last 2 year period. The risk is too high with the 150-year projections that we're seeing with the rise of the water levels and these carriers and with the severe weather storms, they just don't want to carry it anymore.
Yeah. No, and because you think of 5 miles out and you're like, that's not waterfront,
Right.
right?
No, nope. They
But
can't even see the
they're
water. They
thinking
don't feel the
150
water.
years out, maybe.
Yeah,
And I remember
correct.
working in the Seaport District in Boston, and I remember seeing like trash cans floating down the street. There were some times
Correct.
when we'd have that crazy flooding, and there was these beautiful apartments being built, and some of them were uninsurable, I'm sure, to a certain extent. And even in
Yeah.
Vermont, which is another part of New England, there has been flooding
Yeah. Severe
that
flooding.
and severe flooding all the way up through southern Vermont, and it's just wild to see that there's really not too many locations in the United States that isn't subject to some sort of risk. Like I'm just
Extreme.
looking like where are the data farms? Where are they? Because they're probably in this like that, but it's also possibly extreme heat, but it's just interesting and I think it is something to think about. And some clients I've talked to are thinking about their homes in Marblehead area and other areas where they're like, this is really getting to be a big expense. And we need to
It's a
think
huge
about if
expense.
we're going to
Yes.
stay here or if we're going to move or expand. So it is something for people to consider and to really understand is going to be a massive part of their financial picture.
And I
as a
think
homeowner or
the
renter. Yeah.
yeah, and I think the last piece to consider, Mass Property is one of the carriers. It's a state-sponsored product that's still carrying, insuring the Cape and the
Mhm.
Islands, because Mass Property insures the
Yeah.
uninsurable or people who have had a significant claim history, et cetera. And with Mass Property, one of the barriers is they only insure dwelling coverage up to $1 million. And if you're talking a significant home on the Cape for your higher valued clients,
Yeah.
it's really a challenge that really are taking on a lot of the coverage on their own for
Yeah.
anything over $1 million.
I have two separate questions, but they're kind of the same question. And they're basically what should you do questions. So I've talked to people who maybe have had an issue in their home, tree damage, something, and they're not sure like what should they use their insurance?
Mm.
Should they not? What do you suggest to people if something happens? And then the other question would be like if they're in an auto accident. Like I've seen some people have some pretty serious, like you said, mass pike accident, faster speeds, more damage, totaling their cars. Like when people have these types of things, like what do you suggest that they should do in order to
Yeah.
protect themselves and protect their insurability?
Yeah, that's such a great question because I think claims are the most overwhelming part for individuals that I see. And I think that's because one, there's emotion to it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a car accident, it feels scary, it feels overwhelming. You feel um, just a bad sense of everything, right? You feel violated if something happens to your home, and it's just very tragic feeling for
Mhm.
people. So I think what I try to do, my job as a licensed broker is to advocate and educate my clients, but it's also, I feel like sometimes I'm like part detective, part insurance agent, part licensed therapist,
Yeah.
a little bit of every role, right? To try to like help people understand and gain like a little perspective. So the first thing is I always educate people when it comes to claims is before you make a claim, think through both the short-term and the long-term consequences of that claim. And what I mean by that is, so first, when you make a claim, you carriers, all homeowners carriers always reward you for a claims-free discount. And those claims-free discounts can be about 20 to 25% of your annual premium. So significant. And that's probably one of the largest discounts that you get on your home and auto
Mhm.
policies. If you make a claim, you lose that. So what I always do with my clients is we first have them get an estimate, and we can get a free estimate. And then, because sometimes I had a client once call me and he had water gushing from his recessed lighting. And he's like, obviously, this is like $10,000. And he was very overwhelmed. And it felt really big and scary to him. I sent a company out to give him an estimate to dry it out, to make sure we didn't get mold. And it ended up being $2,500. So when we took the $2,500, subtracted his $1,000 deductible, he was going to net $1,500. When we looked at his annual premium price and we removed the loss-free discount for 3 to 6 years, depending on the
Mhm.
carrier, the math, he was upside down and it didn't make sense. He was actually losing money over a 6-year period as opposed to gaining money. He had the resources to be able to pay that claim out of pocket, and that made more sense to him than submitting a claim.
Mhm.
So you never want to submit a claim until you've really done your homework and research and making the best educated guesses in this process. And that's where working with a broker really is helpful to talk through with a human.
Yeah, I think so. Because if you don't have a broker to talk, you'd really just kind of suggest that they do that kind of research on their own and get the
Yeah,
estimates.
correct,
And
absolutely.
then
But
you
you can
can't
always
really tell,
tell.
but you can see what the discount is, right? Or if, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can guess, right? Like, so some carriers look at like a 3 to 6 year like look back. And so on the homeowner side of things, and I think the other one I get when it comes to claims is people's things will start to get older. Oh,
Mhm.
my roof's getting older, so I want to get it replaced. Is my homeowner's
Mhm.
insurance cover that? And I want people to think of it's got to be a peril. It's got to be related to a peril. So lightning, fire, water, hail. It's got to a tree, something tragic has to happen. It can't just get old. It's not like a warranty per se, right?
Mhm.
So, but we do want to keep, home maintenance and preventative maintenance up so that you can ensure that you keep that carrier. On an auto side of the things, many people I find that because your car is broken,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's either collision, which is two autos hitting each other, or comprehensive, which is something else like a deer or a
Mm-hmm.
tree falls on it or that kind of thing. Many people, I get more calls from those kind of claims and people wanting to place claim on an auto than a home. So a glass claim, you can always make a glass claim. Those are easy. They don't really count much against you. It's a small little blemish on your policy, but it's common and it's okay to make those claims. Refrigerated property, I do not recommend making claims for that. That's something I'm like a big advocate on.
Yeah.
If it's on your policy, it's $250 to $500. It's not worth it because you can lose your claims free discount for $200. Not
Yeah.
worth it. And that's like a big unknown for people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you feel violated because your power went out and you just went to
Mm-hmm.
BJ's and stocked up
Yeah,
on
you're
chicken
so
and
jealous.
you're like it feels so overwhelming in your
Right.
day-to-day life, but long term, we want to think of remove the emotion
Yeah.
and look at it logically. And then the final one is like with the autos, if there is a significant amount of damage, you could always first drive to an auto body shop, get a quote,
Mm-hmm.
or tow your car to the auto body shop, get an estimate or a quote, and then we can make the decision from there. I'm a big fan of higher deductibles to be
Mm-hmm.
able to reduce that lower premium, but it's really important that we weigh those pros and cons as we look at it. And over time, most people will be in less than 5 accidents in their lifetime. And
Mm.
when you look at that, having the higher deductible saves on your annual premium. And that savings on the annual premium, then over time, it's sort of like Vegas and playing the odds, right? I
Yeah.
don't know what's going to happen to my clients tomorrow, but over looking at sort of like the general
Mm-hmm.
data, it's safer to do that. But
Yeah.
many people feel like their car gets into a minor fender bender and they're like, I have to make a claim.
Yeah.
And
Or
I'm
I pay
like,
this insurance. That's what it's for. And it's like, well, yes,
correct.
but we
But
really
here's
want it
what's
for
going
the
to
big
happen.
things. I know. We, of
Yeah,
course,
exactly.
the month we paid off our Jeep a couple months ago, wind, tree branch comes, knocks the side mirror off. And so
Yeah.
again, we took it to an auto body shop, though, someone that we're familiar with, and
Yep.
ended up being a $600
Yeah.
thing.
And for most people,
Where,
and I think for your clients, having a little savings
yeah,
to cover, I call it, if your storm door blows off,
yeah,
drive to Home Depot and get a handyman and get a new one, right?
yeah.
If claims of 10,000, I always tell my clients as a general guide,
Mm-hmm.
claims of $10,000 or more, we will definitely consider. That's
Yeah,
why you have insurance. That's
that's great.
significant, right? Claims under 10,000, we really want to talk about and weigh those pros and cons, especially for people with high annual premiums or larger homes.
Yeah, I think that's a good threshold. I think that's something, or if you know what's in your, like having an emergency fund, I think is important for people for this reason. This is what it's for,
Yeah,
it can
exactly.
be good things sometimes that you need that money for, but it can also be things that kind of go wrong, that can impact your life that you want to kind of get moved on and get through quickly. I did have another question though, because I think this is something that people really don't understand. How much liability are people actually exposed to? How much risk when it comes to something like a major accident, somebody getting hurt on your property? I know people are opening up their pools now. People have trampoline, all of these things that people might have. Like, what are people actually at risk for if somebody gets seriously injured and it's their fault?
Great question. I typically recommend for people, so you have a homeowner's policy or a renter's policy, something that's insuring your dwelling that has liability and coverage for your stuff, the house, the structures, your personal property, etc. You then have an auto policy that's very similar. It's mostly liability based because they're at higher risk. You're driving around at high rates of speed. The chances that something's going to happen on a liability side is much higher on the auto side than the home side, typically. But what I want you to think about is above that sits what's called an umbrella policy. And this is a policy that most people don't know about and most people don't understand. And I spend most of my time sort of talking about why that is important. And so you have liability on both your home and your auto policies. We typically put an appropriate amount for the client, and that can range per client. Most of my clients on the auto side choose one of two things, 100/300,000 or 250/500,000. And those two levels are very appropriate. The state minimums are 2040. And what I mean by the slash, the 100 is if an individual is impacted in your car, and then up to 300 if it's then the whole auto of multiple people in the car. So that's what the slash means, and understanding sort of what those coverage levels. And they all sort of have different buckets that they pull from. So if you're hit by an underinsured individual, then you want to make sure you have enough coverage to cover you because they don't have enough coverage in the event that you're hurt. And so sometimes people don't understand because they think these coverages are just paying out to people. So they choose lower coverage levels. But I encourage them to think about like this one covers you, right? In the event that you're seriously hurt or people in your auto. And you really want to think through that. The umbrella, but those typically what we find on the auto side in the event that something tragic happens, right? We live in New England and there's ice. That happens. You swerve to avoid someone who has lost control of their vehicle and you hit a vehicle and two people die, right? That's the worst case scenario type of situation. Your auto policy won't be able to handle that type of lawsuit alone as a standalone. Even if you choose the 250, 500, it will most likely cap out, which means then you are then on the hook. And your clients who are accumulating retirement and accumulating savings and assets or garnishing wages, those are all awful things that can happen. The event, the chances are that something like that happens are low, but we see it on the news all the time, right? We see it in our daily lives in the insurance world. So an umbrella policy sits over those two policies, just like an umbrella, and it provides up to an additional $1 million of liability insurance. I recommend that for all of my clients who've accumulated assets that are at risk. Especially clients who maybe have a more high profile job as well. If you are my client who's a 23-year-old who just graduated from college and have an apartment, one car, and $24 in your Venmo account, probably not the appropriate product for you. You can have it. It will give you great protection, but it's probably not necessary. But for all of my other clients, it absolutely is. And I want you to think of it like it's very similar to like term life insurance. It is very affordable. It's a couple $100s a year. It's based on the amount of stuff, amount of humans, amount of homes, amount of autos. So the price is higher if you have more. But it's really such an important protection. And I hope that my clients pay for the couple $100s every year and never have to need it. Because if you're calling me, something awful has happened, right?
Yeah. I do think it's a great, I am a fan of umbrella policies. I talk about it a lot with people because you're right. It's not like it goes up to that $300,000 limit and then it's capped and it's done.
Right.
And so I think that's, I think it's important, especially, maybe you have a business, maybe you have properties. I mean, I have a property in Vermont where we have renters sometimes. There's people on my property doing things, and so I think when the risk goes up or the more that you had, like the more important it is to protect it. And it's relatively cheap. Like on a month-to-month basis, it's really not that expensive because you're right. It's not very likely that it'll be used. So,
but if it is, it's tragic.
It's definitely
as we're seeing those increases, like this is really what we're living right now in the insurance industry. We are seeing more and more larger and larger because people see insurance as like they can pay me. Right. It's not like we're all, every lawsuit is putting a burden on all of us. Right. And we're seeing that through our annual premium increases.
Yeah. I'm thinking about some other questions that people, I'm curious. We mentioned the discount for having, a clean record. What are some other discounts that people might be eligible for or maybe could be on the lookout for if they know it's time to change their insurance or they're looking to maybe find a better deal because it's getting expensive?
Yeah, that's really such an important thing. And I this is one of my favorites. Everybody loves a discount. Everybody loves a discount. So, we always, when we do an insurance policy review, we always talk about the coverages first, right? We get to all the stuff you have to talk about. And then I'm like, all right, now let's talk about the cost saving strategy. And there's sort of two things. There's cost saving strategies and there's discounts. And those I keep as two separate buckets. And so I'll talk about discounts first. So discounts, a lot of the times, if you're a part of an organization like AAA, AARP, those are two that I think really do a great job of marketing with insurance company. and providing different opportunities for different discount options. I have a carrier that provides a 5% AARP discount. And many times people don't realize that the discount levels are really associated with, for AARP, you don't have to be over 50.
Yeah.
And so many times, they can't discriminate based on age. So my 24-year-old clients who have this certain carrier all have their AARP cards. And I think that's really great but you have to know that as an agent, right? And know that we can get people signed up for that. And so it's a really great opportunity. I think I have some carriers that offer what I call incentive-based discounts or other partnership discounts, like one carrier partners with the Pan Mass Challenge. So you might not already donate to the Pan Mass Challenge, so you have to be careful when you're getting a quote to ask something like, what discounts are available to me and which ones don't I qualify for yet, but I could in the future.
Yeah.
And so this carrier, if you donate to the Pan Mass Challenge, then you get a up to 5% savings, and that's a huge discount. But if the agent asked you, do you donate to the Pan Mass Challenge, and you answer no, then you could not really be getting that discount, right? But it really is available for you. So having clients really advocate for themselves to say what is available. And those discounts change all the time. So it's important. That's why an annual policy review is really great, or every few years, because you can say to your agent, or they should call you and say to you, hey, there's a new discount available. Like, you now qualify because this didn't exist before. And that's really important.
Yeah.
On the cost saving strategies ends, there's a lot of different things. Higher deductibles on both the home and the auto are really important. Whenever I see people with $300 auto deductibles or $500 auto deductibles, I always encourage them to think about the $1,000 mark. And that $1,000 mark for collision deductible is sort of like a sweet spot that I find. $1,000 collision and $500 comprehensive really provides people with a significant cost savings. But you have to weigh the pros and cons because every carrier is different. So I always quote it out for clients, because if you're a bigger policy, you're a mom, dad, 3 kids, 4 cars, you have a significant annual premium. A lot of times we see that. If you're, little Sally grandma and you have one little auto that you barely drive, sometimes those cost savings aren't worth it to increase the deductibles. You have to look at every single scenario and ask for a quote for that.
Does bundling always make sense for people, or no? Okay.
No. So people always ask about a bundle. Like, the carriers that market the bundle discount have done an amazing job with their commercials. Everybody's in. Everybody's like, I want a bundle. That's the way to go. I need a bundle. So how bundles work is, obviously the carrier wants all of your product because that's how they make money. They want your home, they want your auto, they want your umbrella, they want the whole thing. What is interesting about carriers, and as someone who represents multiple carriers, I have carriers who are more aggressive on the auto side, but less aggressive on the home side, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So what I really look at when I quote is I quote all 10 of my carriers, and then I look at, like, what's A plus B equals C. And then I look at, like, if I do this home with this auto and then put those together, what does that equal? And so that's really important to make sure that you're reviewing all the different options to be able to see.
I think that's important because you're right. It has been kind of marketed heavily, but when I think about it, like, there are some, it makes sense that there's some that specialize in a certain area, and maybe they don't get into that space as much, or they're not the most competitive over here. So I think it is important to really kind of take a look at this and work with somebody to get help and make sure that you're actually covered for what you need, even if it means you're spending more, but also that you're maybe reducing your risk. Or, people have changed, like you mentioned with COVID. A lot of people now, maybe they have a home office. Maybe they've started a business. Maybe all of these things have changed. And I think what I see a lot of people not think about is the insurance.
Yeah,
it's the
absolutely.
risk. As somebody who's a business, maybe you start a business and you're like, well, what's the risk? I've had people who are like doing like massage, they're touching people, and I'm like, there is risk. Like, this is, to me, such a big area. And I mean, I'm just in that space where, like, if you're handling people's, there's just risk attached to what I do.
Absolutely.
But I think about where you work, how what you own, all of these things that it's like you could protect them, but also you might have people's information. There's all of these risks now that I think are just a little bit different than maybe how business has always been done in the past. So I love that you're, working with your clients, that you're kind of super dialed into this space because it is changing so much. And I feel like you can really understand it if you're shopping, and then you might be completely
Yeah.
like,
And you bring up such a good point with everybody's lives are changing. And so many people, when I ask them, I have like my standard questions. It's kind of like when I do an insurance policy review, I need to know you. I need to know who you are, what you do. Are you jumping out of airplanes? Do you have killer dogs? Like what I need to know all the things as fast as I can. And many times people don't know, and everything is insurable. Everything is insurable. Let's be clear. There's a product for every client with every type of risk, but it's about being honest and forthright with as much information as you can so I can find the right fit for you. Because sometimes people will not disclose intentionally or non-intentionally. Or they're worried about their dog, or they get a dog and they don't even think about it because they're so excited about the dog and they got this homeowner's policy and they don't even know that they don't allow that breed of dog. You don't want to put yourself at risk by not disclosing information, because your carrier, in the event that you make a claim, cannot provide coverage because you are in breach of, it's a legal contract. And so you have to think of it like that. If you are breaching it intentionally or unintentionally, and many times I really think about like, I need to ask people as much as I can so that they realize and they're making an informed and educated decision, because this is a big decision that can really have a negative or positive impact on your life.
Definitely. And you're right about that. I remember talking to an insurance agent once, and they had insurance coverage for like a specific event, like a party. Like anything is insurable. You can't insure anything. So you don't have to worry, if you have to talk to somebody because you have, this in your backyard, or a dog, or this, you're going to have this wedding at your property, or whatever is going to happen where there's going to be people in increased risk. Everything is insured. You're right. It's just a matter of weighing the pros and the cons and figuring out who's going to pick it up.
We have a trampoline and a pool in my home, right? Like that is like, trampolines are okay. They just need to have a net, and like just understanding all of the little nuances.
No, it's so interesting. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. I'd love for you to share for anybody who is in the location where you mentioned, or, even if they just want to follow you, kind of learn more, how can people get in touch with you if this is something that they're ready to look into, or they want a person because they've gone without a person for too long? How can people reach you?
My email is a great way to reach me, because it's also a great way to send me a copy of those policies that, again, you have to find, you have to keep electronically. My email is Kim, Kim, at Barrows, BarrowsINS.com. So BarrowsINS.com. So, and it's really, look for a human who can support and guide you. And sometimes in an agency, those humans can change. So that's okay. And that could happen because they move on to a different company or a different career. So know who your human is really such an important piece.
No, I agree. I'm a big fan. I feel like there's a lot of situations where it helps to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody and get the help. And it's going to be in those stressful situations. It's going to be with those big events. And I think, this might be an area where people have price shopped in the past, but I do think it's important to maybe spend a little bit more to make sure that you're actually properly covered in the event that something happens. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining me today. And thank you everyone for listening. I'll make sure to include all of the information on how you can find Kim in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for joining, and we'll talk again next week.
Thank you.
Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.